If you ask any accountant, analyst, or somebody who's been working in business, they'll tell you that the business world works on monthly, quarterly, and annual cycles. Month end is the thing we do where we stop the clock and collect all the numbers so we can sit down and analyze whether or not we are on track. And most people just assume that that's the way it is and that's the way it will always be. They can't imagine a world where we don't have month end. It's just become so ingrained in our way of thinking that it's not something that we ever even stop and think about or challenge. But today I want to talk about that very misconception, because if you start with that idea, then you're significantly limiting the way that you think about the future. Now, to be a bit provocative here, in this video, I'm going to argue that month end is already dead, and Kiraa is what we used to kill it. So in this video, I'm going to tell you how we achieved a 0-day close for one of Australia's largest packaging companies, and then I'll explain what that means for the future of AI. So let's start with the basics. Who invented this concept of month end? Someone did. I mean, it's not a law of nature. It doesn't follow the moon. It's something that collectively the business community has agreed is the way that we all do our reporting. The idea, in fact, comes back to 1855, where Daniel McCallum, who was the general superintendent of the New York and Erie Railroad, he managed 500 miles of track. Now today that would be nothing, but back then that was enormous, and it was the first enterprise in history which was too big for one person to manage physically. So McCallum's idea was that in order for him to manage that effectively, he needed all his superintendents to send him specific reports to him on a fixed cycle. In other words, he knew that at a certain point in time, everybody would prepare a snapshot of information and send it to him so he could understand what was going on. This idea caught on, and by the 1920s, when technology had caught up, General Motors was running their dealer reporting on 10-day reporting cycles, and parts of their business even had insights daily. So there's always been this enormous appetite for information to be available as quickly as possible so that people can make high-quality decisions. So where did this idea of month-end actually come from then? Well, it turns out that in 1922, a guy named James McKinsey publishes a book called Budgetary Control, and he turned accounting from a record of entry into a forward-looking management tool. The book argued that the annual budget must be phased, and the year must be phased into 12 periods. You should prepare a monthly estimate, and you should report your actuals against that estimate, and you should call it a variance. And it's this thinking 100 years ago which businesses all follow today, and it's so ingrained in our thinking that we never even question whether it's the right thing to do. Then, of course, by convention, because that's just what everybody settled on, monthly reporting just became the norm. Then when computerisation arrived, first in the 1960s with government and big business, and then into smaller and smaller businesses, software developers started building accounting and reporting tools which relied on this concept of month end. But then, as applications became more sophisticated, we started to develop specific systems, invoicing systems, inventory systems, warehousing systems. And that's what allowed certain parts of the business to improve their productivity through specialization. But now we have a problem. We've got multiple systems all doing their own thing, but we still want to get the summary of our business every month. So in order to provide that monthly snapshot, we all had to agree that our systems would cut off at the same point, and then provide that information to a central location. And that's what we call month end. We do month end to provide a common cut-off point so we can synchronize all of our system together and get an accurate snapshot of the business. That's great, but now we've just created a bottleneck because certain information depends on other information. You can't get your profit until you get your sales and your costs, but you can't get your costs until you get your payroll. There's this complex network of information which has to be calculated before you can calculate others. Now, in most medium and large size business, month-end reporting is a massive logistical exercise. I've spent most of my career managing month-end processes, making sure that person A provides information to person B, so person P can calculate something to give to person C. And it's all of these interdependencies that has made month-end reporting such a nightmare. And I honestly believe it's time we abandon this concept completely. When Dina, my co-founder, and I started Kiraa, we realized that although the cost of information technology was increasing every year, the employee satisfaction with IT was decreasing at the same rate. We'd see organizations spend fortune on massive IT projects, only to find out that their solutions only covered a small fraction of the business process. And more often than not, critical decisions would still be left to spreadsheets because the big enterprise systems didn't handle certain parts of the activity. So when we left corporate and started the company, we started working with a company called Oji Fibre Solutions, which is a corrugated packaging supplier. It's a complex, multi-plant manufacturing business. There's just so many moving parts. Now, the corrugated business is also complex because every box that they make was for a customer, and that product was specific to them. So one customer could have hundreds or thousands of unique products, and that means there's an enormous amount of complexity to deal with all the time. The thing is, when we spoke to their sales team, we learned that their reps were really frustrated. Invoices were in one system, production orders were another, customer contracts were somewhere else. This system didn't talk to that system. And so the only time that they had everything was at month end, and that could take up to 10 business days before they could get critical information about their portfolio. 10 business days is 2 weeks, which means half the next month was gone before they understood what was happening in the previous month. Now I'd like to step back to 2009 while I was working at Nestle in the Middle East. Back then I was responsible for the consolidation of 13 countries in the region. I was the key reporting liaison point for head office in Switzerland. One of the problems that I had was that in my role, not all of those 13 countries worked on the same calendar. Now in the West, we just accept Monday to Friday as the working week, but that's not the case in the Middle East. Lebanon, for example, adopted the standard Monday to Friday calendar. Gulf countries such as the UAE started their week on Sunday, while Saudi and Oman started their week on Saturday. Now, thankfully, that's changed since I was there, but let me tell you, 3 different operating calendars is a terribly complex thing to manage. If, for example, month end landed on a Wednesday, Switzerland would expect me to provide the sales numbers on the Friday. But most of the countries in the region were already on the weekend, which means that I could report the numbers, but there was nobody around to answer any questions. So to fix that, I came up with this idea of a thing we call the Blue Book. It was a daily report that my team would produce to tell us exactly what was happening in each region, each country, each brand, and each product every day. And that way, by the time I got to month end, I'd already seen the trends emerge. I'd already spoken with the relevant people to understand the issues. In other words, we just ignored the idea of month end completely and did the whole monthly reporting exercise every single day. So what we did at Oji was the same as what I did in the Middle East. And we fixed the problem by connecting all the systems into a single analytics layer and joining them in memory. We didn't design a data lake or a business warehouse or a dashboarding solutions with 15 other levels. We simply created one system and grabbed all the data from all the relevant places and joined them up dynamically. And once we discarded the concept of month end, we started building systems that allowed people to make decisions at any time. And that's what we call a 0-day close. Now, I'm not going to lie, achieving that has been an enormous amount of work. It's taken me and my team 3 years to build and perfect the tooling, which allows us to make a highly efficient data pipeline. If I think back to version 1 of the Kiraa algorithm, we were getting the equivalent of 1 million tokens for about $5. Today, we're getting the equivalent of 1 million tokens for less than 1 cent, and jobs that used to take 8 hours can now run in minutes. We've come up with a novel approach which doesn't rely on SQL or relational databases. We run our entire analytical pipeline in memory, which is what makes it so ridiculously fast. And because it's so fast, we don't have to run it once a month. We can run it every day or every hour. So look, that's a very roundabout way of explaining what Kiraa does, because it's addressing a problem that most people don't even think is a problem. And that problem is the way we think about business reporting. We're all still stuck in the idea of 1922, where we prepare an annual budget and do monthly reporting. My dream since I entered the workforce was always a 0-day close. Being able to understand the business in real time was always the objective, and throughout my career I've had people told me it was impossible to achieve that. I even once got kicked off a project team because I had an argument with the project leader who thought that aiming for 0-day close was unrealistic and we should really be targeting day 3. Anyway, Oji Fibre Solutions achieved 0-day sales close in August last year. That means on the first working day of the month end, the entire sales team had access to all the information they needed to do their job successfully. And we're now working on extending that ideas into other areas of the business outside sales, procurement, logistics, finance. And once we achieve that, we'll have the entire information that business needs available at any point in time. And that means month end is dead. We won't all be scrambling to get our numbers in on time or working back. Our entire knowledge generation pipeline will be automated. And finally, after 100 years, we'll stop worrying about what happened and start worrying about what we can do about it. I'm Dr. Errol Brandt. If you enjoy my content, please like and subscribe. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.